So good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zone. Thank you very much for joining this presentation under the Balkan History Association webinar series. Today our guest is Dr. Spyros Tsoutsoumpis. Thank you very much for joining. He's a military historian with an interest in the history of paramilitary violence, nationalism, and irregular warfare in the Ottoman and post-Ottoman Balkans. With a huge experience as well as a lecturer. Right now, Dr. Spyros Tsoutsoumpis is a lecturer at the University of Manchester. He taught at the University of Lancaster, Wolverhampton, and Manchester Metropolitan, and has been awarded with different fellowships. The last ones were awarded from the School of Advanced Studies in Sofia, New College Europe, and the Harry Frank Guggenheim Foundation. So this is our guest. Thank you very much for joining. And the presentation for today explores the intersection between paramilitary violence and nation building in the 20th century in the southeastern Europe. The focus of current presentation is on borderlands of Macedonia that were split between Greece, Yugoslavia, and Bulgaria, and the region of Epirus that was divided between Greece and Albania. These are the highlights of today's presentation. For our participants, we would like to keep the questions until the end of the presentation, and please raise your hand and you'll be able to ask the question after Dr. Spyros Tsoutsoumpis finishes this presentation about beyond the state, nation building, and violence from the ground up in 20th century Southern Europe. So I will give you the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lepar, for this introduction, and many thanks to Dr. Mihai Decnea, who invited me to and made this webinar possible. So without further ado, I will proceed with my presentation. So let me begin by sharing my screen. And let me just give me 1 minute. Just to you. Yeah. So today I'm going to discuss, as Dr. Lepar said, the intersection between ethnic violence, paramilitary mobilization in southeastern Europe by paying specific attention to one area, an area known as Thesprotia, or in Greek, or Tsamaria in Albanian. And I'm going to discuss specifically the crucial years between the onset of the Second World War and the aftermath of the Greek Civil War. Let me explain a bit these two images that I have on the first page of my presentation. The first image that shows this depicts this little town in the mountains. This is a town called Filiati. It used to be a thriving majority Muslim Albanian town in the turn of the previous century. Nowadays, there are no Muslim Albanians left in this town. And the other image depicting the three bearded gentlemen and the one officer with a dashing mustache the man in the middle is Napoleon Zervas. He was the head of EDES, the National Republican League of Greece, a right-wing resistance/paramilitary organization, and it was this group that played a very important role in facilitating nation building in the area, both through processes of mass violence, but also through other processes that I'm going to explain in further detail in my presentation. So it is these two things that I look at: how ethnicity, nation building relates to paramilitarism. But let me begin first with a short story. In 2012, I was writing my first research monograph, A History of the Greek Resistance, that was published by Manchester University Press. And I was collecting interviews with veterans of the resistance movement, especially nationalist veterans who are not that well represented in the scholarship. So I came across this man. He was in his mid 80s by then, Grigoris Liolis, and he was quite an impressive person. He was around 6'1", 6'2", quite rare for a man of his time. He wore a khaki shirt, cavalry breeches, knee-high boots. He got a very dashing figure, almost like somewhat out of a kind of adventure novel. And so he was a veteran of this right-wing group. But he was not just a veteran, he was also the mayor of his hometown. He was a businessman. He owned an olive press, he owned several smaller businesses. He was also a broker and for the local for the Conservative Party, Nea Demokratia, and for the conservative parties that preceded Nea Demokratia. So all in all, Grigoris Liolis was a successful businessman, paterfamilias, 5 children, about 12 grandchildren, the very personification of middle class respectability. But when I asked him to recount some of his life story, I was quite impressed. He told me that he was born extremely poor in a household that spoke only Albanian. He could not speak Greek until he went to school, and he only went to school for 2 years. In 1941, before he joined the resistance, he was a bandit, mostly robbing Greeks. In 1943, he decides to join the resistance. He was indifferent to politics, but he became, in his own words, an ardent nationalist. During the time of the Greek Civil War, he remobilized and he formed his own right-wing militia, which allowed him more or less to control the local economy. He distributed the properties of the Albanian Muslims who had fled the area to his cronies and to anyone who, could provide a quid pro quo from him. He gathered substantial property, and he became one of those people who made the nation locally. Uh, but this is the paradox at the heart of my presentation. Usually we hear about the nation being constructed from the top down. It is the school teachers and the gendarmes, the politicians, the people who come from the metropolis and then tell the people in the peripheries, you are Greeks or you are Albanians or Serbs or Romanians. And all these identities are being constructed from the top down. What I saw, though, in the case of Grigoris Liolis and what I later on tried to understand and discover was something very different. I found that it was these people, these leg breakers of history, as I call them sometimes, the hoodlums, the bandits, the thugs, the guerrillas, the militiamen, who constructed the nation state from the ground up while also collaborating with the people at the metropolis. So it is this paradox that's at the heart again of my presentation to understand how and why these people became nationalized, how and why they helped the state to construct its structures to construct the nation, but also to problematize this idea of monolithic top-down identities. At the end of the day, what is the nation? The nation state is associated with modernity, often with progress, but of course with violence, with a homogeneous culture, with respect to law and order. And Grigoris symbolized everything that was national. He did not speak Greek. He didn't like to speak Greek even in his old age. He was not comfortable with the language. He vehemently denied he had any Albanian origin. He said, I'm not Albanian, I'm even better than most Greeks. But he was also an outlaw, a bandit, blackmailer, so it's these people who actually intersected and collaborated with the state to create the nation. And it's this history that I want to retell, that I want to capture, and then by problematizing current understandings of how the nation state was created in Southeastern Europe. So how was it created? Again, the model that we have is the one from Eugene Weber. He used this model when he tried to understand how the nation state was a national identity were created in France. And very famously, he said that nation turned peasants into Frenchmen. And it is this idea that has been picked up from most historians. If you look at Mark Mazauer, or if you look uh, Mark Beyondits, you will see the same. You will see the same narrative. The state arrives and it makes people national. What I'm trying to do is actually challenge this and conceptualize a new model, a model that understands nation building as an intersection between the grassroots, the periphery, and the metropolis. Neither side is dominant, and neither side provides a solid narrative. It is through a series of complex negotiations between the people that we can call the men of the gun, the leg breakers, the bandits, and the central state that nationhood is being constructed, especially in the periphery. I conceptualize these people as a violent middle class. Why? Middle class is at the heart of nationhood, at the heart of the national project. Middle class people, teachers, businessmen, entrepreneurs, uh, military officers, and so forth, represent the nation. They are the forefront of constructing and of creating a national identity. Also, their financial position also makes them the center of their communities. So, for all intents and purposes, it is the middle class that became nationalized, at least in the conceptual models that we have so far. I do not argue actually with that, but I argue that it is these people from the periphery, the hoodlums, the bandits, the thugs, the militiamen, who actually constituted this middle class. But it was a violent middle class because the means of accumulation and the means of production that they possessed were essentially violence. The middle class rose to its position thanks to education, social mobility, technical ability, ability in business. The people like Grigoris Lolis became middle class and they helped the nation and they integrated the nation state and they helped the nation state integrate these areas thanks to their skills in violence. And I'm going to therefore to describe and analyze how this model applies to my case study, the area of Thesprotia or Samaria. So Thesprotia in the turn of the 20th century had two main communities. The one was an Orthodox community composed by Albanian speakers, Vlach speakers, and also Greek speakers. And the second one was the Albanian Muslim community. There are also some Greek Muslim speakers. So the land was dominated by landowners, most of them Muslim Albanians, but there are also a few major Greek landowners, but also Greek merchants, or rather Orthodox merchants, who played an important role there locally. But the sense of identity was very weak. A Greek intellectual of local extraction who traveled from Istanbul to Thesprotia or Samaria in the early 20th century, he recounts the following dialogue. He says, I met with some of these Muslim landowners and some of the Christian retainers, and I asked them, what are you? And the Christian said, well, we're Christian, of course. Or the people he identified as Greeks. And the people who historians will later identify as Albanians, they say, well, we're Muslim. Nothing less, nothing more. These things though begin to change. The nation state, the Greek nation state, but also Albanian nationalists, and of course, were trying to contest this area from the Ottoman Empire. By 1909, 1910, the area had become a hotbed of conspiracy and irregular warfare. So it is at this time that the state tries to find local people, the Greek state, that will be able to help its agenda. They try to find men of violence, men of action, and they turn to these people, to the predecessors of Grigoris Liolis, they turn to bandits, people like Kapitan Koutoupis or people like Kapitan Zarkadas and other men of the silk. These were bandits and rustlers, and they're being used as mercenaries, as subcontractors of violence by the state. And they're being used to spread and to consolidate Greek nationalism. And these people are redeployed once again during the Balkan Wars of 1912, 1913. So approximately 1,000 Orthodox Christian irregulars are mobilized. Maybe twice as many Muslim Albanian irregulars are mobilized for the Ottoman state, and later on for the Albanian nation state. And the Balkan Wars are extremely violent. And the Balkan Wars begin a process of dispossession and violent accumulation that accelerates. What is this process? Well, the people who help the state, the bandits, the paramilitaries, the guerrillas, now, thanks to their involvement in war, but also thanks to their skills in violence, they loot, they raid during the wars, and they accumulate significant properties. After the war, they are not handed down by the state for these illegal violent acts. The Greek state is very weak in the area. So what they really need is people to shore up the defenses, defend the area against the newly born Albanian state, consolidate its rule. So the bandits slowly become auxiliaries for the state. They become the nucleus of a small elite. But we have other kinds of elite. We have the families, nomadic clans of shepherds who used to live in southern Albania, but they moved southwards and then began to buy up land. We have businessmen who moved from southern Greece who also began to buy up some Muslim land. So we have the first showings of a small political slash economic elite. At this point in time, these people are necessary to the state, but the actual elites, they come from southern Greece. So the first MPs who are elected in the area, the first members of parliament, they come from Athens, or from Crete, or in general from southern Greece. What is the relationship to bandits then, and to these people, to this first articulation of the violent middle class? Well, a politician who comes from Athens has no local ties. So how do you gather the votes? Well, you use people of influence on the ground. So these are the people like Sili Mastoras, a very famous bandit, or Yasin Sadiq, a rather famous Muslim bandit. So what they do is that they use these bandits as local power brokers, as people who will help them to mobilize local voters. In exchange, they give them access to land, access to resources, and allow them to continue their activities unabated. So this is the situation by the mid 1920s. In the mid 1920s, we have another change. This change is that the Greece has lost its war, the 1919-1922 war with Turkey. So we have a small influx of refugees, but more importantly, great estates in Greece are being broken down, and the land is divided up to peasants. And this also creates the first stirrings of nationhood. Why? Because up until then, despite the presence of these local violent power brokers, things did not differ that much. Economic structures and the economic structures were not different to those of the Ottoman period. But with the breakup of the great estates that actually targets Muslim landlords, but also very many Muslim peasants, we have kind of a gradual nationalization of the local population. People think that, especially the Muslim population, thinks, and quite justly so, that have been wronged by Greece, and slowly they turn to the newly founded Albanian state for hope, and maybe they aspire that one day they will be united with the brethren in the northern border. But this is more or less the situation in the interwar period. We have an area where the state is weak, we have an area where there are a lot of social and economic grievances slowly become nationalized. We have an area where the elite comes from the outside and it's ruling the region with the help of these bandits and all the other outlaw groups. Things begin to change though by the onset of the occupation. In 28th of October 1940, Italy invades Greece, and the area becomes the epicenter of fighting. In April 1941, Greece capitulates, and the first few months of the occupation are relatively peaceful. But things change because Muslim peasants who feel that they've been wrong, they start slowly to mobilize against the Greek state in the hope of regaining their old rights and economic, obviously, and economic resources, and potentially even uniting with Albania. So by 1942, we have lots of murders, ethnic strife, ethnic conflict. This ethnic conflict is not, or even though I described it as ethnic, it was not 100% ethnic conflict. What do I mean by this? In the beginning, competition had less to do, and violence had less to do with ethnicity, rather than with land ownership, with the owner, with trying to avenge past wrongs, and so on. Many of the people who find themselves in the mountains forming resistant groups, like Grigoris Liolis, whom I spoke about in the beginning, they went to these guerrilla groups, they joined these guerrilla groups because they are penniless, they are desperate, they are jobless. So they act as a crosscut between bandits and guerrillas. And so the other, one of his interesting story, Zois Padazis, one of the men who fought in the same group, others along with Grigoris Liolis, he first joined the nationalist resistance actually after killing a Greek gendarme. So these people are not nationalists per se, but they're nationalists in the making. Things though begin to change by 1942. There are way too many armed Greeks or Orthodox Christians in the mountains. They are being mobilized both by the left-wing resistance and by the right-wing resistance. This alarms the Italian occupation authorities who administer the area, who begin also to arm local Muslims in increasingly large numbers. So by late 1942, 1940, and early 1943, have the institutionalization of the local Muslim militias. All these armed clans now form this group that's called Auxilia, which is a kind of gendarmerie funded by the Italians. More and more Greeks also join the nationalist groups, and violence becomes more and more intense. And things begin to become even more radical after the fall of Italy. But the presence of these groups did not only entail violence. Guerrilla groups need civilian support to exist. They need recruits, they need food, they need intelligence. So the groups that operated locally, and specifically the nationalists of others, they try to create their own state-like structures. So what do? First, they organize economic production. They also begin to articulate their own vision about a future Greece that is nation-centric. They spread propaganda, mostly of an anti-communist nature. They create youth organizations. They create women's organizations. They teach the peasants how to think about the nation state. And it's the first time that the nation state and this kind of narratives appear, especially in the provinces, in the periphery, and in the mountains. Also, they provide them something more important: jobs and money, because during the occupation there's a huge economic crisis and people cannot simply make do. But the resistance, the nationalists, are being supported by the British. They provide a very significant amount of money, and therefore the resistance of others, is able to pay peasants either to induce them to join the groups as guerrillas or to carry out a series of other jobs for them, from muleteers to whatnot. Uh, but this situation therefore brings the nation state, closer to the mountains. And this situation becomes even more radicalized in the winter of 1943-1944. Why? Well, at the time, Italy has capitulated and German army, the Wehrmacht, has taken over the administration of the area. And they simply say we cannot tolerate having this state within a state, this parallel state of these nationalist guerrillas in the mountains. So what do? They mobilize even more Albanian Muslim peasants. They form their own militias. They storm the hideouts of the guerrillas, and they wreak havoc there. Obviously, after they retire, the area is in tatters. And this, paradoxically, makes the peasants not so much angry with the guerrillas, but even more attached to them. Because after the Germans have destroyed all the local resources, the only resources that's left to them is violence. It's joining the guerrillas in order to get some money, in order to get their hands on raiding and looting. And we have the slow formation of a new class. Peasants who are skilled in violence create their own groups. They join the resistance or they expand their own existing groups, and they begin to engage in the raiding economy. They raid Muslim villages. They murder, they rob, and they bring the loot back to the mountains where they distribute it to their followers. And obviously, the resistance struggle therefore begins a kind of a life and death struggle over the control of resources, which further consolidates this new kind of class. Needless to say that the old ruling class, the Athenians and the Southern Greeks, have returned back to Southern Greek or Athens. The few civil servants and the few gendarmes that lived in the area have moved back to Southern Greece. So the area is for the first time administered by a local ruling class, this new class of warlords. But again, the situation has not been nationalized completely. There are still some tensions. For instance, some Muslim villages, like the village of Kodra or Kutsi in the area, joined the nationalist resistance. Why? Because they had blood feuds with other Albanian Muslim villages. Uh, Even the nationalists sometimes collaborate with Muslim groups by making common cause on the basis of a shared anti-communism. But these ties begin to break down. The more intense violence becomes, the more scarce resources become, and the more hard the boundaries of nationality become. So by mid-1944, Albanian Muslim militias have created their own state-like structures. By the same time, Greek nationalist groups have also created their own state-like structures. And by the summer of 1944, as the Germans retreat, the Greek nationalist groups descend in the Albanian-speaking lowlands. And then they commit a series of massacres, beginning with a massacre in a town called Paramilitaries in the summer of 1944. All in all, between June 1944 and July 1944, maybe 1,200 or 1,500 Albanian civilians are killed, and the rest of them flee over the border. So, by the time that Greece is liberated in the autumn of 1944, the area has been cleansed, so to speak, of the minority population. And this image that you can see is Napoleon Zervas, the leader of others, and his guerrillas descending from the mountains and coming to the regional capital of Ioannina, arriving at the regional capital of Ioannina. But there are still tensions because others is a minority group, is a small nationalist resistance group. Much of Greece has been dominated by the left-wing resistance of Ethnico Απελευθερωτικό Μέτωπο, National Liberation Front, and its armed group of ELAS, Ελληνικός Λαϊκός Απελευθερωτικός Στρατός, or Greek People's Liberation Army. So by this time we have political tensions. Briefly, the left and the right clash in December of 1944. The right loses, others loses the struggle, and they have to flee to Corfu. The left nevertheless doesn't predominate. It actually, the government and the right is held by the British, who managed to restore order. So by February 1945, the left that was once dominant capitulates. But the situation in Greece, and especially in the borderlands, is one of absolute chaos. The state is extremely weak. The economy is extremely weak. The left is still as a threat, and all over the northern borders in Bulgaria and Yugoslavia and Albania have the rise of socialist regimes. So the state once again turned to these people, these warlords that first emerged during the occupation, and they unleashed what historians have described as a wave of white terror. So they subcontract the violence, so they subcontract the services of these warlords. They give them immunity and access to resources, and in exchange they ask them to crack down against the Communist Party, the communists, the few remaining members of the minority in the area, but more broadly in the northern borderlands. So, and people respond to it quite enthusiastically, not just because of political reasons. We already have a strong anti-communist sentiment in the area because of the preceding events, but also because the state, by providing them with immunity, it provides them also with job opportunities. In an area that is desperately poor, joining these groups that wage anti-communist violence is a way to survive, is a way to thrive, actually. And they move a step closer in a few months. Zervas decides that being a nationalist leader and a warlord has given him an advantage. So by late 1945, he creates his own political party, Ethnico Koma Elados, or National Party of Greece. He decides to run for elections, but Zervas is a military officer with a very disreputable past. He has no political ties, but he has the allegiance of all these veterans. And as one of his veterans wrote, we decided to form a party that was essentially a civilian army. And they also decided that they have no need for Southern Greek elites or for intellectuals. They said, we do not need no school teachers or businessmen. We fought to liberate the area, and it's only just that we're going to run the area in the future. So in March 1946, local elections take place, and Zervas' party triumphs in the entire Thesprotia area and all across Epirus. And the warlords, quite significantly, now enter the Greek House of Commons. They have truly transformed from some contractors of violence to a real local and national elite. Zervas also becomes very powerful because a few months later he manages to become the minister for uh, uh, the Minister for Internal Affairs. Just to give you an idea of how powerful the bandits have become, this is an extract that I found from a local newspaper. It was written by this warlord, Kapitan Baratsas, and he wrote to Christos Stavropoulos, a lawyer who wanted to run for MP. And he writes, and I read, Dear Mr. Christo, I'm your good friend as you know, and while I do not count for much in Athens, here I'm powerful, and I'm willing to work for you. And for my friends, I want you to let me know if you'll run for elections. I have fixed the electoral registers, in Samaria, and this way everyone is dependent from me. Ask Taki, another warlord, to tell you how good a fixer I am. You should sort out my legal affairs, though, in exchange for my help. I was sued by Zaravutsis, a local leftist, because we beat him up and stole 5 sovereigns from him. Tell me how this goes. So this letter actually exemplifies the fact that for the first time during this chaotic situation, it was the warlords, the men of violence that ran the area. The state was a need for them, and as the state was dependent from them, they took advantage of this situation to enrich themselves, to get immunity, to become more powerful, more affluent, and now enter politics. The politicians were no more. The men of the pen were replaced by the men of the gun. And as Zervas becomes a minister of internal affairs, things begin to look even better for them. In March 1946, a civil war breaks out in Greece. And Zervas has this idea that in order to fight effectively against the communists, we must create our own parastatal apparatus. We cannot use legal means to fight against them. We have to deploy these militias, peasant militias, that will take the fight to the left. These militias known as the MAI, Monades Αυτασφάλειας Υπαίθρου, and the MAD, Monades Αυτοάμυνας Διώξεως. The first means self-defense, rural self-defense groups, and the second means units of pursuit and defense are being raised locally by Zervas with the help of the old warlords. The man that you see on top, he's called Dimitris Galanis. He used to be a math teacher until he joined the guerrillas, and by 1947 he runs his own paramilitary outfit, 300 strong, that engage in all kinds of atrocities. So what we see is that with the outbreak of the Greek Civil War, the warlords had entered the parliament. The warlords now begin to run their own parallel state-like and military-like apparatus. And they become more and more powerful. Why? Well, one of the reasons is that Greece during the Greek Civil War, the economy was shattered. There was nothing, there were no jobs in the countryside. Once again, the only profession was violence, but there was another way to get some money. It was through Uncle Truman, the US aid, the US military and economic mission. The Greek Civil War, the Greek state waged a civil war thanks to American help. And the warlords, the former warlords and politicians, but also the parastatals, were the people who get you access to some money and a job. Why? Because obviously the state fought against communism. The state had to be sure that you are not a communist in order to hire you, in order to give you some kind of aid. And who could assure them that you are not left-wing, that you are not a threat? Well, who else but the people, the anti-communist leaders on the ground? So this means that on the one hand, the presence becomes even more important. They're not just military subcontractors, but for all intents and purposes, they rule the area, they rule the local economy. They administer resources, they administer jobs. And this becomes even more important as the war rages on, because of the war, the state relocates forcibly tens of thousands of people from the mountains where they could fall prey or be recruited by the communist insurgents into the lowlands, into the cities. Nomadic shepherds, once again, that used to roam the countryside freely, now they're being forced by the state to flee to the lowlands and to establish themselves in towns and cities and villages. So all this area, it is quite fascinating because the social composition of the area has changed. The Muslims have fled, but all of a sudden, because of the civil war, this area that was half empty, it's being populated again by refugees, by armed subcontractors, by thugs, by nomads, by veterans and men of war. A new population is being created. A new national population is put in place during this havoc, during this chaotic era. And this new population is being controlled and is being administered for all intents and purposes by the warlords, by men like Grigoris Liolis, by the men of the gun. The politicians do not really matter. It is this man, or rather this man in interaction with the metropolitan elite groups, either military or political, who actually run the show. And this actually, and by the time the central state is very weak in the area. So a Communist Party writes, notes the following, that the real power, the real state here are Zervas's men. They are the ones who give orders and directions to the local authority. There is police, there is a district attorney, a military command, the governor general, the nomarch, but they can either comply with what they, their businessmen, dictate or be ignored by the common people. So by the time the central state institutions are very weak, the people who run the show are the warlords. And they run the show directly in collaboration with the central state, who subcontracts both military and political tasks to them. And this allows them to become even more powerful and even richer. Almost 20,000 Muslims have fled the area. And there's a lot of land and a lot of businesses and a lot of empty houses for the taking. Who takes them? Obviously the warlords, once again. As a local newspaper states, the abandoned properties in Samaria were seized by the most powerful and by the most cunning bourgeois. But it is the warlords who are in charge, who decide who gets what. And here we return back again to a good friend, Yorgos Liolis. And this is what I heard about him when I interviewed one of his fellow villagers. He said, of course you could get, there was poverty, there was chaos, but you could still get a job or some land, as long as Grigoris gave you a little note with his approval, that you are not a communist, that you are to be trusted. He was used to be a warlord, and he could do as he saw fit, because he was a man of the state. And because of that, he also became more and more well off. So by 1941, the world changes, and we have several major changes. A new ruling elite, a new population, and at the same time, the state wins, and a new, therefore, anti-communist identity. And local people now they have begun to identify very much with this anti-communist narrative. And we have another shift, a shift from a hot war to a cold war. So the borders of Greece and its neighboring countries are consolidated, but the state feels insecure. So therefore, what do? They create the so-called surveyed zones that you can see in the map. So these areas north of the line are surveyed zones, which means that people that really it's the military administers these laws. So civilian laws do not really apply. The military is in charge. There is a permanent state of exception there. So it applies to every other single civilian in Greece. It doesn't apply to them. So these areas become a kind of, one can describe them as almost an internal colony, a state within a state, a separate state with its own set of rules. And this state is further consolidated in 1952 because the Greek state is alarmed. Because of the civil war, many people have fled, minorities have fled, there are empty spaces, and this is the borders of the country, but also of the West during the Cold War. So the thing is, what do we do? How do we defend them? And the idea is that we proceed to colonize them in earnest. So in 1952, we have the laws for colonization, which provide land to people of true national feelings. People who have anti-communist, very solid anti-communist identities are being given land, are being given property and loans to settle in the area or to consolidate the holdings in the area. At the same time, we have the process of colonization. The surveyed zone also further solidifies the rule of the state. It is an internal frontier, and violence is a way of life. You cannot move from one area to the other without having an express permission from the local gendarmerie and also from the local paramilitaries. Paramilitaries are not demobilized after the end of the Civil War. Instead, they're seen as the first line of defense in case the Cold War once again turns hot. So they're being seen as the first line of defense. And at the same time, they're seen as the first line of defense against the internal enemy. The internal enemy could be people who are left-wing, social democrats, feminists, trade unionists. So the warlords are still in charge. The state still keeps them as a reserve army, and it gives them an undue amount of power. And what's more important, because of the surveyed zone, they can operate outside the borders of legality. They can do as they see fit. Sometimes even the policemen, the gendarmerie, is afraid of them because they have guns, because they've been brutalized, and because they have the ears of the military command and the central state. So the connection between the periphery, the warlords, and the metropolis, it is ongoing. The central state is present and is stronger, but still it is the warlords who have the first and the last say. And this is exemplified by several factors. By the time in the 1950s, in order to get a loan from the agricultural bank, you have to hand a note from the warlords. To run a business, the business must be warlord approved. To be able to immigrate to America, Australia, Germany, you have to have what they call πιστοποιητικό εθνικών φρονημάτων, which was a little piece of paper, which was a certificate that demonstrated that you're not communist, that you have a healthy nationalist feelings. So we have the warlords the warlords and only them are able to provide the certificate, which makes them very powerful. But there is also a paradox. Yes, they are tyrannical. Yes, they are thugs, but also they provide some services to a local population that was always outside the reach of the state. Yes, they are thugs, but they're also our own boys who can help our own extensive family, clan, and local networks. So actually, they provide some service. Also, they're, in a sense, they're a point of pride. There's the local sense that, you know what, we beat back the Italians, the Germans, the Muslims, the communists. We are at the forefront of the Greek of the Greek nation state. And it creates a very kind of paradox, a very strong sense of identity that is local, that is militaristic, that takes pride actually on, one could say, on the martial prowess and on the savagery, on the ferocity of local people. And this overrides other parts of their identity because people still do not speak Greek. Many of them do not speak Greek. They speak Vlach, they speak Albanian, or they're kind of Romani speakers. So we have this paradoxical identity. On the one hand, multicultural, on the other hand, nationalistic. On the one hand, you kind of defend the state, and on the other hand, you take pride on the fact that you're an outlaw, that you're a guerrilla, that you're ferocious. And the state is very happy with that because the warlords provide this kind of anti-communist services. They keep the surveyed zone kind of under the boot of the state, and for the right-wing governments that actually run Greece for much of the post-Civil War period, they do something else. Whenever the left or centrists begin to emerge as a viable political force, as it became in the 1961 elections, the warlords are deployed to crack down against them. So in 1961, there are elections in Greece, and in northern Greece, warlords are being marshaled to control the voters. Gun in hand, they take the people to vote, and they tell them, vote in the right way, or else they stop buses and they distribute ballots. And they tell them, there are 50 people in this pass. I expect to see 50 ballots for the right, or else. But this also creates other problems because by the 1950s, by the 1960s, agricultural economy becomes weaker and weaker. And whereas many people benefit, others do not. So we have a wave of immigration, first towards Germany, Sweden, Belgium, and from the 1970s onwards towards the United States and Australia. So we have this paradox. The warlords had saved the state. They have created a new, peculiar sense of national identity. But the violence ultimately has led to the emptying of the countryside. They have saved the nation state, at least they perceive it, but they also have destroyed, to a great extent, the local societies. But the question is this just a Greek story? Is this just a Greek peculiarity? I argue for the opposite. Look at these pictures. The man that you can see on the one hand, the man with his uniform and the medals on top, is Punis Arasic. In the other picture, you can see him actually murdering a Croatian MP in the Yugoslav parliament. Punis Arasic began his career as a bandit, as a warlord. In the interwar period, he became a politician. In the late 1920s, he commits an infamous act of violence by murdering the head of the Croatian Peasant Party. In Serbia, in Yugoslavia, as in Greece, the warlords were in charge. The state was not made by bureaucrats, but by bandits, and in collaboration with the bandits. And this made the state actually adopt the very violent practices of the bandits. One can say actually that the savage kind of the frontier violence in the Balkan peripheries migrates to the metropolis, and it creates a new kind of politics that destabilizes the entire area for the decades to come. The other man is Celal Bayar, the president of Turkey. Celal Bayar was of Bulgarian extraction. His family fled Bulgaria in 1979. He becomes a guerrilla against the Greeks during the Greco-Turkish War of 1919-1922. And then he rises up the ranks of Turkish politics. He becomes the president, but the mentality of the frontier, the mentality of the bandit and the warlord still remain, because in Turkey as in Yugoslavia, bandits, mafias, militias, paramilitaries remained an essential tool of policy making. During 1955, the Greeks are being ousted by Istanbul, which was the last place where the Greek minority had a foothold in Turkey. And Jalal Bayar and his networks played a paramount role. The paramilitaries are being deployed to do what the state was not willing to do openly. So this is ultimately what we saw in Greece, what we saw in this little area of the Sprotia, was a common practice across Southeastern Europe. State weakness, the fear of minorities, the weak hold of national elites, but also continuous warfare in the area, leads them to cooperate with these groups, these peripheral groups of bandits and thugs and warlords and paramilitaries. This leads to the rise of a new violent middle class, people who use violent accumulation to rise up the social ladder, create social mobility. It creates a consensus for the state, but at the same time, it destabilizes the politics of the state by introducing a violent ethos of the periphery into the metropolis. And I will even argue that this is not just a Greek phenomenon. If we just look at places like Tijuana in Mexico, if we look at the Sertão in Brazil, if we look at other peripheries across the globe, I think that what we see in the Balkans is part of a broader global history of borderlands, crime, and nation making. This history, if we conceptualize it, if we look at it, and if we apply it, it can potentially change the way that we view the nation state, the nation building process, national identity. It can recognize that what we know about democracy, capitalism, the rule of law, modernization, state and state building, they do not really apply. That crime, paramilitaries, and the outsourcing of violence, they do not just happen in moments of state weakness, but they're a permanent fixture of the state's arsenal when they build and when they try to preserve their institutions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I will invite participants to ask their questions, so feel free to raise your hand and to ask the question. Okay, I think I will break the ice until the other participants will come with their questions. So it's a very interesting presentation, and thank you very much for flagging this. I think today nation somehow, some of them are facing this kind of nationalism still. My question for you, Dr. Spyros Tsoutsoumpis, is related about the landscape. I think it's important as well to flag this the environment, how the environment played, because Greece, as we know, is a country full of mountains and the sea. And I think for the audience will be an interesting point as well to exploit this perspective about the landscape and the impact as well on the nationalism and this kind of violence, how it was flagged during this period.
Well, the landscape, especially in the area that I was talking about, that I'm trying to explore, was exceptionally mountainous. In the uplands, huge forests, and in the lowlands, it was marshes. It was almost uninhabitable. It was good only for pastoral activities and for growing olives. Other crops that we have associated with the Mediterranean diet, like, I don't know, courgettes and tomatoes or oranges, they were simply not there. It was a place of extreme poverty, and because you had the mountains also helped you foster this pastoralist tradition. And pastoralists, not just in Greece, but in all of the Balkans, because of their environment, because of the jobs, they're very good in wielding violence. They have to protect their flock from raiders, from rustlers, from wolves, from bears, from other predators, which makes them very adept, in a sense, in warlike tasks, and which creates a kind of a reserve army for anybody who wants to go there. You just have to go to the mountains, and these people are poor enough to do anything, skilled enough to commit violence, and because oftentimes they live in desperate situations, they are an ideal material for this kind of violence that I've talked about.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? I'm checking as well the chat. If not, I have a list of questions. So it's very interesting. As well, going to previous question from my side, do you think if Greece or other countries with a similar, let's say, pattern, if they would be on, let's say, a plain landscape, would they have this kind of, let's say, historical tradition of building their nations, or this might change and it would might be a different
I
way
think
of building the cities
it's
there?
not it's not just the landscape. It is also the presence of multiple groups of ethnic minorities and the presence of resources. If you look at Dobruja, it's an area that has been contested by Romanians and by Bulgarians, and you have the same extremely violent traditions, extreme right-wing politics. And Dobruja is a very fertile plain. It still is a foremost area of agricultural production, and it was a very bloody area, where the soil was soaked with blood for much of the interwar period, and where some of the worst excesses and some of the most fanatical representatives of both kinds of nationalists, both Bulgarian and Romanian, actually kind of emerged. So it's not just the landscape; it's the mixture of the populations that actually creates this. Because during when the state wants to homogenize an area, or it is these areas that are being targeted by nationalists. It is in these areas that we have tensions. So obviously poverty accelerates this, but in a place like Dobruja, even though the poverty was not as desperate, the insane mixtures of people, like from Bulgarians, Iranians, Ukrainians, and Muslims, all of them together, when nationality becomes the foremost marker of identity, then it creates this kind of chaos for predominance. So I think it's a combination of both factors.
Okay, I will think I will come with another question. Do you think that the Marshall Plan had an impact in shaping this kind of nationalism in after the Second World War and in the first part of the Cold War, or it was just an economical boost and that was all? So I think it's
With the,
interesting as
without
to connect a little bit this.
well, the Marshall Plan and American aid allowed the state to fight against the left-wing insurgents. It also, as the nationalists used to say, they used to praise Uncle Harry, Harry Truman. So the fact is that American aid became a crucial weapon in this anti-communist kind of violence. Uh, you, you do not have just to break somebody's head in order to convince him to join your political side. Kind of face-to-face direct violence, military violence is not the only kind of violence. You can simply deprive them of resources. So depriving people of resources, make them relocate forcibly and tell them, you know what, we have all this help, food, clothes, blankets, and so on. They can help you survive. But we will deprive them. You will be deprived of them unless you join our side, or we will deprive you regardless because you do not choose to defect. So yes, American aid helped the state to combat communism, but also solidified the presence of these anti-communist groups because they have something tangible to give. They say, you know what, we have access to American aid. This made them very, very powerful at a time when there was literally nothing kind of in terms of the economy. When the countryside was the new, I think agricultural production declined by over 20 and sometimes up to 30% in some areas. Unemployment was as high as 35 to 40%. Wielding this kind of power, having access and control of these resources, was a matter of life and death. And being deprived of these resources was an act that felt like violence, and it was violence. People do not need to kind of beat you up, they can starve you to death or starve you to submission in order to convince you to join their side or punish you for not joining them.
Okay. And if there are any takeaways for the audience, if we somehow try to learn from the history, because this is the main benefit of history, to learn and not repeat the same mistake in the future, or to learn and to build a more robust and powerful society or nation, which will be the takeaways for us as the audience for this presentation.
The only lesson to be learned is to create inclusive polities that will accommodate the demands of minorities. But this is not the way that the nation state is being built. The nation state is being built on organized violence. The nation state was built during a specific period of economic development, early capitalism was consolidated in the high capitalist area, and it was purported to serve the interests of specific elites. So the intersection between these groups, these marginal groups in the peripheries of the countryside, or today in the peripheries of the cities, mafias, gangsters, and so on, it is part and parcel of the repertoire of the state. As long as the state exists within these given economic conditions, this relationship will be perpetuated. So unless it is not just a matter of, just how to put it, it's just fine tuning the policies or making, or enacting specific kinds of legislation. And this is not just a part of Greece. If you look at recent developments, let's say in South Korea, an advanced state for all intents and purposes, and a powerful state, the tanks roll down the streets. And this is not just one articulation. We know that in South Korea, for instance, the state habitually collaborates with mafia groups in order to break down student demonstrations, in order to enforce contracts. The same thing happens in Japan. And the same thing happens in very many states. This is not just a Greek or a Balkan idiosyncrasy. This is how the state works. And the Balkans actually were at the forefront of this development because Greece is a much older state than Germany or than Italy. And the Balkans developed, and also the Balkan Wars and the destruction of the Ottoman Empire was the first wave of decolonization. So the Second World War and what followed afterwards were the second and third waves of decolonization. So the Balkans provided not just a premonition, but a model for nation building.
Thank you so much. As well, I have other questions coming. So, how is national bullying applied by left-wing or right-wing movements? This is a question for Mr.
So, nationalist violence, paramilitary violence is being employed directly by the left or the right. There is economic violence, dispossessing you of your property or depriving you of goods, or actually enacting forms of violence on the ground, like turning people away, just ethnically cleansing them. So this has been obviously applied by the left and the right. Nationalists, there are different variations of nationalism, obviously. But at the end of the day, nationalism has been rightly identified with the right, because what is nationalism? Nationalism is an inclusive idea of the nation, of who belongs and who doesn't belong in the nation state. And these ideas have been commonly embraced by the right. So I think like left-wing nationalism can apply for a point in time during periods of decolonization. We have left-wing nationalisms. One can even describe Fidel Castro as a left-wing nationalist, out with the Yankees, free Cuba and so on. One could describe Ho Chi Minh as a left-wing nationalist. But for all intents and purposes, nationalist movements are right-wing. Well, how these political movements influence the idea and perceptions of the Balkans. It is very simple. The state in the Balkans was able to expand its national territory by subcontracting violence to these groups. After its territory was enhanced, after its territory was expanded, they tried to maintain it, and they also try to protect the state from internal enemies by continuing the same pattern, by subcontracting violence. So what began during periods of national struggle or national liberation, all these groups then and all these practices are brought back from the borders and they're integrated into the metropolitan repertoire of politics. So the collusion between the state and these non-state armed groups actually integrated violence as part of the political process in the Balkans, legitimized the way that non-state armed groups and the state behaved to minorities or to groups that were seen as politically threatening, and it actually brutalized the political life of the Balkans, and it created instability for decades. And it still creates instability because once you have a kind of a sort of a national threat or a perceived national threat stepping outside the boundaries of the law and either subcontracting violence to these groups or even justifying the violence, just saying that, what, we have these violent races, but they're just concerned citizens. It's the whole long legacy of the nation-building process. In the Balkans, from the Danube to the Aegean Sea, this idea that the state can act outside the boundaries of the law, that the state can subcontract violence, can outsource violence, and can actually step on the rights of immigrants, of trade unionists, of whomever is seen as anti-national. This is a narrative, this is a discourse that comes from these areas. The violence of the periphery actually has been consolidated into the metropolitan cultures of the Balkans. It doesn't matter if you're in Belgrade, if you're in Athens, if you're in Bucharest, or if you're in Tirana. The repertoires and the modalities of the state are more or less the same, and they hark back to this era.
Thank you so much. And I think you replied as well to the second and the third question from the same participant. So are nationalists typically left-wing, right-wing, or purely nationalist? And if you would like Dr. Spyros to debate more, or I don't know, for the participant, if you have other, if you would like to find more details about this, please let us know.
I'll be happy to take another question and then perhaps we could drop up. What do you think?
Yes, there are other two questions, so it seems that it was a good warm up. How did these political movements influence the idea and perception of the Balkans?
As I say, I think I've kind of already
Yes, it was already covered.
I think it was already covered. But what I want to say is that sometimes we have this image of Balkan exceptionalism, but this is not just a phenomenon of the Balkans. It's an integral repertoire of the nation-building process. I just use the Balkans to explore these processes. You can find them everywhere. Well, just one instance, I'll just make an example. It might seem far-fetched, but it's actually there was a very important, there was a very important book on American military history that was written, I think, a decade ago. The title was The First Way of War. So the idea was that the consolidation of the American, or first of British America, then of the new American nation state, came through waging war against the indigenous population, Native Americans. And this was a process of people acting a form of war that was savage, a form of war that was based on dispossession, extermination, and using illegal tactics. So historians have now broadly agreed that this model that was applied there in what used to be the border areas, for instance, Ohio or the Appalachians, became integral to the American military and political practices. The idea that we cannot source violence in order to expand the nation state began first at the border, and in a sense, it also came back to the metropolis. It became a part of the political culture. It is not just a Balkan thing, to put it this way. It is a way that the state is being made, it is being expanded, and the power is being maintained across the globe. It has to do with the structure of the nation state rather than with a specific area. And we can see it everywhere, from Northern Ireland in the British Isles to, as I said, to Mexico, Brazil, South Korea. It is a part and parcel of the nation state.
Thank you so much, and I will let she has some questions to ask to you, so please.
First of all, I hope you can see me well. I'm speaking from my room because I'm not feeling well, but hopefully I will be much better in the sooner time. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to the lecturer and to the topic, which is quite interesting. Giving my participation in the writing of the doctoral thesis of Yugoslav-Turkey political relationships in the interwar period. Policy, economy, and social behaving in that period, all in the between. Given the topic, I would like to recommend for watching, if you haven't watched, our series is in currently, I think, is on Netflix, so you can watch it and on English and understand it, because it is really relating to the speaker topics, given that is also set in the interwar period, and it is about robbery, murder, opium cartels in the kingdom of Yugoslavia after the establishment of the dictatorship of the King Alexander I, Yugoslavian King Alexander I. And it follows the story of the two Belgrade police inspectors, and also as well as it follows the story of their personal lives. It follows the story of the current policy and political establishment in Yugoslavia, giving the rise of Yugoslav Communist Party. And also smuggling the drug violence, as the speaker mentioned, in that part of the Southeast Europe. And also given that the opium is one of the large part of my dissertation, which is currently will be soon defended. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. I would like just to recommend that the serial name is Balkan Shadows, or the Black Sun. We call it Senke nad Balkanom, but it's quite difficult to speak in Serbian and to understand it. But I will repeat again. Balkan Shadows is quite. It has now 2 seasons, and is quite famous. Not just in Serbia, believe me. And I agree, and I'm really grateful again for allowing me to speak. I'm sorry for my English. At the moment, as I said, I'm not so healthy as as I was. I'm a little under cold, but I'm again really grateful for your lecture, and I'm grateful for the chance to speak and to give me the time you gave me. Thank you, and
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And as well, we received on the chat the link. So thank you for the recommendation.
Sure.
And for sure, we will watch it. Dr. Spyros, I think we are almost at the end. Thank you very much for your time and for this wonderful presentation. Very interesting, very useful for all of us to learn and to understand, in fact, what is impact of this behind all these nations and the nationalism idea. And if there are any thoughts that you would like to say at the end of the presentation, or to pieces of advice that you would like to give to the audience, please.
No. I just want to thank you for for these questions and for hosting me here today. And if anyone wants to reach out, they can do so through my through my email, and I'll be happy to talk, to exchange views about all these topics in Southeastern Europe. I'm open to discussing, and I'm open to learning new things from all the esteemed colleagues. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
wonderful day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.